I listed off my top 10 movies of 2018 so far. And now it's time to get to the real fun. The worst of the worst. The top 10 worst films of 2018 that I've seen so far. Similar to my top 10 2018 films, I have the same disclaimers. 1. I have not seen every single movie of 2018. I have seen a lot, over 140, but I haven't seen them all. So I'm sure there is a lot worse films and some real trash out there that I didn't bother seeing. Though I have seen a lot of trash. Number 2, this is just my opinion. This is what I hated the most, what I disliked the most, what movies made me the most uncomfortable in theaters. You can have a totally different opinion, that's fine. Also, when it comes to what year a movie is, I look at the US wide release date. So if a movie had a limited release in 2017, but a US wide release date in 2018, then it's a 2018 film. Also bear in mind, like I said, I saw over 140 movies. So movies that are mediocre, movies that are average, or movies that you might feel are extremely disappointing and the worst movies you've ever seen, most likely won't make the list. Most people see only a handful of movies a year. And so if you were to see like 10 movies a year and the worst one was Fantastic Beasts, then of course you would say Fantastic Beasts was the worst film you've seen this year. That's even somewhere in the middle of my list. I see some trashy films, believe me. This really is a worst of a worst list. Of course, let's shoot out some dishonorable mentions, ones that are really bad, ones that I found boring and terrible, that didn't quite make the list. There is A Wrinkle in Time, Bad Samaritan, Night School, Book Club, Midnight Sun, the US remake. I haven't seen the, is it Japanese, I think is the original version? I haven't seen that version, but I did see the US one. Sherlock Gnomes, yeah, that didn't quite make the cut surprisingly. Peppermint, God, I hated that movie. You could just go see my review for that one. That somehow did not make the top 10 worst. Stratton, Hurricane Heist, Day of the Dead Bloodline, and yes, surprisingly, Truth or Dare did not make the list either. And you're probably thinking, man, if those movies didn't make your list, what the hell did you see? Well, let me lay it out for you. Number 10 is probably the worst movie that I've seen Bruce Willis in. And I think he's the highest paid actor in the movie, at least top billed. But he's pretty much a side character, despite the fact that he's on the front cover. It is Acts of Violence. If you want to see a better movie, just go see Taken. Taken's an awesome action movie that deals with human trafficking. Acts of Violence is not. Even the action in this movie is dull. It's boring. It's edited in a very stale, very by-the-books way. It's just, there's nothing exciting about this movie. And there's nothing good or no good message in the movie either. It's just bland, stupid, boring, and just, yeah, don't even bother. Number 9 is a sci-fi movie gone horribly wrong. Nope, I'm not talking about the Cloverfield Paradox. I'm talking about The Beyond. Just think of all the good that's in RoboCop, in Arrival, in Interstellar. Combine those movies, take away all the good, throw in all the bad, and you get this horrible documentary-style sci-fi movie that tries to imitate all three of those films, but falls flat on its face. I just know that I'm going to eventually have to review this one, and review it in depth too. So that's 2 reviews I'm going to have to do for The Beyond, eventually. Oh boy, I can't wait. Speaking of which, I can't wait to see my number 8 again, because that's another movie that I'll have to rewatch so that I can review. And this was probably the most boring comedy that I've sat through in several years. This is Life of the Party. There's almost nothing resembling an actual story in this movie. I didn't think Melissa McCarthy and her husband could get any worse after seeing The Boss and Tammy. But this is worse than both of those movies combined. It's an imitation of a comedy movie of a girl going back to college, a grown woman going back to college, whose daughter is also in college as well. It's an imitation of that kind of story, but with no meat, no actual comedy, and very predictable. I didn't laugh a single moment during this movie. My number 7 is a boy and his dog type of movie. It's the most cliched version of that type of story. It's bland, it's boring. Don't worry, I'm not talking about Alpha. That actually surprised me. And I honestly loved that movie. Or, not loved it. I would say I really enjoyed that movie. This one looked like a piece of trash. It was a piece of trash. It was A.X.L. I don't even think I need to bother talking about this movie. I know I'm going to have to review it someday. And I already told you my movie experience. You can look that up in my video somewhere. Because I did have a movie experience for this where a girl actually cried during the theater. Cried about how actually sad the movie is when I was trying to stifle laughter with how cliched and stupid the sad ending was. My number 6 is probably the worst film that Clint Eastwood has ever directed. I thought Jersey Boys was boring, bland, and stupid. This movie takes the cake. This movie is far more boring and just baffling why it was made the way it was. It is the 1517 to Paris. They didn't focus on the actual heroic act that these people are known for. Stopping a terrorist on a train. That could have been a really good short movie. It could be exciting. In fact, that scene in the movie towards the end is the only good thing this movie has going for it. But mostly, you're going to be bored to tears before you even get to that point, because it tells you the story of their life, of them as children, how they became friends, their career and their college, their trip before they get on the plane. It's mind-numbing. And I didn't even mention the fact that they didn't even have actors playing the people. They had the actual people playing themselves for a big movie, a wide-release movie. Non-professional actors as the main characters. I looked at my list, saw what my number 5 was, and suddenly remembered that, you know what? Life of the Party, while it was a miserable time to sit through the theater, and it was one of the dullest comedies I've seen in many years, there's a second comedy that was just as dull and just as dreadful sitting through in the theater. And it was Super Troopers 2. Now, I know I'm going to get some dislikes for putting it on the list most likely, and I'll probably get even more dislikes for what I have to say about the original film. But hear me out. Super Troopers came out at a time when I was a teenager, and I was actually probably the right age to see the movie and find it funny, because a lot of teenagers, we used to find crude films to be the most hilarious thing that they've ever heard, because it was the first time kind of hearing such crude jokes for some people, I guess. And so Super Troopers is a cult classic for people of my age, but I didn't get to see it during the time when I probably should have, where I would have enjoyed it. People who liked the first one probably still like it because of nostalgic reasons. I don't have any nostalgic feelings for it because I never saw it when I was a teenager. I saw the first one right before I went to go see Super Troopers 2. And Super Troopers at least has a romantic side story that I enjoy and two characters that I legitimately liked. Super Troopers 2 doesn't even have that. It is a carbon copy of the first film, just done in a different setting, and all the characters, or at least the two characters I liked in the film, one is pretty much not present, and the other character I liked becomes a dick in this one, just like all the other troopers. This was a miserable time sitting in the theater. And it was pretty much full, and I had to sit in the front row. God, this was awful. Oh, but my list gets better. Number 4 is a movie I never thought would come to theaters. It became a 2-night only special event, a Fathom event. And because of how ridiculous the movie sounded, I just had to see it for myself. I knew I was going to hate it, and sure enough I do, but it's only number 4 on my worst of the year, and it is The Trump Prophecy. I don't even want to talk about the film. Just look up my review. It tells you everything you need to know about this god-awful film. Number 3 is actually a third comedy that I had a miserable time sitting through. How did I forget all 3 of these frickin' comedies? Number 3 is a comedy by Tyler Perry. When he makes a drama or a thriller, it's apparently very funny. When he makes a comedy, it's one of the most god-awful things you can sit through. Number 3 is Nobody's Fool. It's, I guess, better and more competent than both the Madea Halloween movies that I've seen. Granted, I've only seen 4 Tyler Perry movies. Both of the Madea Boo Halloween movies, Acrimony, which was at least a hilariously bad movie that I highly enjoyed because of how bad it was. Nobody's Fool is the 4th film that I've seen from him. And it was annoying. Tiffany Haddish's voice was obnoxious throughout the entire film. And the movie is like 2 movies combined, where it starts off with one movie, then that movie ends and a second one begins, and then it's a romantic movie, but then something happens where the first movie comes back to life and ends, and then the second movie ends. It's so weird. There's so many things in this movie with story-wise that is so incompetent and so bonkers and just so... What the hell? How can you not make a movie? You've been doing it for how many years now? You should be able to tell a story competently. But you know what? Everything that I've said in this list, I could probably safely say at least it's kind of a movie. The other 2 on my list, I don't even want to consider them movies. Number 2 is Gotti. Actually, you know what? These last 2 films on my list were the most confusing things I've ever seen in theaters. I'm not someone that easily gets confused with movies because I see so much and I can predict where a movie is going usually because of how much I've seen them. I know how a movie works. I know what sort of story to expect. These last 2 films they actually legitimately confused me. Gotti confused me because I go into the movie not knowing anything about John Gotti, which is what this movie's about, played by John Travolta, and by the end of the movie, I still don't know anything about John Gotti. It was like taking his life and making PowerPoints, sort of like bullet points of his life and just putting the scene in there. But if you don't know anything about his life or anything about the people around him, then you don't learn anything from this movie. It's like you have to know beforehand about John Gotti's story in order to get something out of it. If you're like me and you knew nothing about John Gotti, this was one of the most confusing movies you could probably see in theaters in 2018. But you know what? Gotti still doesn't compare to the dull experience that I had seeing a movie that is quite controversial. Yeah, it was so bad. Well, it had a scene that was so bad and so inappropriate for a family film that it had to get cut out of the film, re-edited, and put into theaters without that scene. I'm talking about Show Dogs. Now, I was on vacation during the time. I was in Florida, and when this movie came out, I didn't know anything about the controversial scene until I got back home a week later. The sad thing is, by that time, that scene was cut out of the movie, and I didn't even get to enjoy that atrocity. Do you know what the weird thing is? I probably saw the most baffling version of that film, because there's a whole conflict where the dog has to prepare himself not to bite the judge as the judge touches his privates. And the scene that was taken out, you'd think would be the whole conflict, like the lead up, the montage of him training and going to his happy place, and then the actual judge touching him. You'd think all of that would be cut out. No, the only thing cut out was when he goes to his happy place as the judge touches him. And so you still have that lead up, you still have that training montage of him preparing himself for what's about to happen, and even the slow motion of the judge going over to him, reaching down and ready to grab, you know. It was, so I got the most baffling version, because I got the lead up but not the payoff, because they kept the lead into it, took out the payoff, and it's like, wait, what? Of course, all the lead up and everything is completely out of the DVD, apparently. I've checked. So I saw probably the worst version of the movie in theaters. So that was the worst films of 2018 in my opinion, or at least the ones that I've seen so far. I'm sure there's worse out there that I have yet to see. But yeah, have you seen, or have you had the displeasure of seeing any of these movies? If so, what do you think about them? Go ahead and comment below. Also, what are the worst films of 2018 that you've seen? I'm curious to hear them. I'm sure there's probably worse out there that I don't even know about, and I really want to hear it so that I can see them and torture myself with them. Actually, don't give any suggestions, please. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews or countdowns of this year or previous years of whatever. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.